We are talking about communication and how to communicate with one another as a couple. And we've gone through some different ideas about communication, different things that we need to learn, the love languages, and learning each other's how we listen visually, auditory, kinesthetic with our feelings, how we communicate with one another. And that's where we're at. We're on letter C of that. And we're talking about how to talk to the animal, how to talk to the animal. And as I mentioned last week, the book, if you want to know more about the animal personalities and all that's involved with that, which I think is probably one of the more helpful studies that we've done, is there's a good book, the book called The Two Sides of Love, which is this one right here, is an excellent book. This is where Gary Smalley and John Trent talk about this in detail. And so this is the one you want to read. There's another one that they wrote called The Language of Love and Making Love Last Forever. And there are chapters in both of those books about the animal personalities and how to communicate with one another. And I would encourage you to get copies of that. You can download them off the internet, or you can borrow those from our church library and follow along with that. But one of the things you want to do, if you have not done, is you want to clearly identify which animal you are and which animal your spouse is as well, whether you're a lion, the beaver, the retriever, or the otter. And all of us are one of those animals and a secondary. So I am a otter lion. My wife is a beaver retriever. And so what is our primary? What is our secondary? And I would encourage you also to use this with your children, understanding what their personalities are. And you can even use it in work situations with friends to understand them better. Don't analyze them, but try to understand them. And so you need to know what your animal is. And you together as a couple, you need to talk about the good and the bad traits of both of those, both of your animal characteristics. Don't complain, compliment. Try to focus on the positive traits. Recognize to your spouse, these are my bad traits. These are the ones I struggle with. These are my negatives. And so that they know that you understand that, and discuss how you together can work on that to communicate better. You want to identify your own personality weaknesses and determine to work on them. What are my weaknesses? That's what I have to work on. And then along with that, but don't focus on the weaknesses of your spouse. Focus on their strengths, what's good about them. Don't focus on their weaknesses, but focus on your weaknesses. And then the strengths, you want to strengthen them. You want to use them as your strengths and make them better in that way as well. Now, as we look at the four animals, how do you communicate? If you're married to a lion, how do you communicate with that lion? And number one is the lion wants you to be efficient and to the point. They don't want the details. They don't want a long, drawn-out conversation. They want you to get right to the point. What is the essence of what you want to say? Just get it down to a few words or less and get right to the point. So if you're having a discussion, if you're having communication with a lion, they want you to tell them, here's what the situation is. Number two is they want you to provide them with options and info. If you're married to a lion, give them options. Don't just give them a blank check. Try to come to them with option A or option B or maybe option C. And here's the choices and the information of why these are good or bad choices in that situation. But give them the freedom to act by giving them options that you're comfortable with and giving them the freedom to choose among those options. You'll find you'll have a better working relationship together. And then you also want to be careful with a lion. Argue facts, not feelings. Don't talk about feelings. Lions are not good with feelings. They're good with facts. They're good with information. You need to be precise. You need to be organized, and most importantly, you need to be time disciplined. They don't like you to ramble on. They will cut you off. They don't want you to go on forever in the discussions. You need to be time disciplined. And ultimately, you're going to need the lion to let them make the decision. Now, if you're married to a lion wife, they're not to be the leader of your home. Biblically, whatever personality you are, as the man of the home, you are designated by God as the leader of the home. but your wife needs to be able to understand that she is involved in that decision-making process. And she's not the one that ultimately makes the decision. If you're a lion wife, you need to understand that in the biblical perspective. But she does definitely need to be involved in that decision making and feel like that she has a very clear voice in that. But they need to make that decision. And then for the otter, when you're communicating with an otter, you want to be stimulating and interesting. Otters their attention span is very, very short. And so they want you to be very interesting in what you have to say, and they want you to be stimulating, keep their interest, and keep their attention focused on you. They're very easily distracted, and so you've got to draw that attention back to you as well. And don't hurry with an otter. If you try to hurry things, they're just not going to do well with that. And then secondly, you want to provide them with concise information and personal benefits. An otter, again, doesn't handle a long discussion. They want you to narrow it down to the bullet points. They love bullet points. And so they want to narrow it down to that and give them that. Here's the pluses, here's the minuses. Give them the concise information without all the details. And what are the personal benefits to you as an otter? And then support their feelings, but challenge them to look at the facts. Otters are very feeling oriented and very emotionally oriented, and you got to keep them focused on the facts of the situation as well. And but try not to argue with them. Otters are not good with you arguing with them. And then don't deal with details. Basically, you need to come to it. If you're a beaver, you want to get into those details because that's what's important to you. But be careful that with the otter, they really want to say, here's what we're going to do, and let you worry about the details. Now, that doesn't mean they shouldn't be involved in the process, and that doesn't mean they shouldn't be helping to make this happen and work out those details, but you got to be careful of that. And at the end with an otter, one of the really good things to do is write down what you agreed to with specifics. After you're done talking, you go and write it down on a piece of paper and come back and says, I want to just clarify, this is what we just talked about. Is this what we agreed to? And is this what you're okay with? And that way later on, remember the otters don't remember the facts the same way you are. And later on when they come back and say, well, I didn't agree to that, you can say, well, wait a minute, we both came down to this. And so it's a lot of times it's good to write that down. And if not to write it down, at least to clarify it for both of you together. And then the otters work well with rewards and incentives. When they're rewarded for participating, otters like participation awards. They like just to be rewarded for doing nothing. And so when they're rewarded for just participating, they're rewarded for listening to you, they'll be more inclined to do that next time. And so you want to reward them and you want to provide incentives for them. When we're all done with this, we're going to go do that. If you've got an otter child, a good incentive is when we're done with this, dealing with this problem, we're going to go out for ice cream together or something like that. Now, there's a difference between bribes and rewards. A bribe is something you do, like when you go to the store and your kid's misbehaving, you say, well, if you stop misbehaving, if you behave yourself, you get a candy bar when we go out to outside the store. That's a bribe. But an incentive or reward, a reward is something that they get not expecting it. Okay, it's usually something you get, all right, you were good, so pick out a candy bar. That's a reward. An incentive is there's a benefit to you after this. We're going to clean the garage, and then we're going to go out for Cold Stone's ice cream or something like that. That's an incentive. And otters work well with rewards, and they work well with incentives. And so if we'll sit down, if we can work through this problem, then we can go ahead and do this. And there's an incentive in there for them. Number 3 is a retriever. And if you're communicating with a retriever wants to be cooperative and they want to be pleasant. And so that's what they want from you as well. They want to be cooperative and pleasant. That's their natural tendency. And so draw upon that and be pleasant when you talk to them and work to be cooperative together. Let's work on this together. Do not manipulate. The tendency is is, especially if you're, for example, a lion or even an otter or even a beaver, any one of the other three personalities, is to manipulate the retriever because they're easily manipulated. You can manipulate their emotions and their feelings. You can get them to agree about anything. Don't do that because you'll pay the price later on. You may get your way at the moment, but you're going to lose in the long term. And then you also want to draw out feelings and desires. You've got to draw it out of them. The Bible talks about Proverbs drawing out like deep waters. And that's the way retriever, they won't tell you what they think. They won't tell you what they want. They'll just say yes to everything, and they'll agree with you. And sometimes you got to say, wait a minute, no, I really want to know what you feel about this, or I want to know what you think about this. And you're going to have to draw that out of them and to get their feelings, to get their desires, what they want in this situation. Provide them with assurances. They need assurance that they're not going to get in trouble for speaking their mind. They need assurance you're not going to get mad at them because they said what they want. They need assurances that in the end, you're still going to love them. You're still going to respect them. And they need constant assurance. And they need provide them with ideas. They're not decisive, and they tend not to come up with a lot of ideas of their own. And so you're going to have to provide them with some ideas, and clear choices are good with retrievers. Giving them a clear choice of A or B, because they're indecisive. If you give them too many choices, that just makes their mind overload, and they can't handle that. And then finally, be non-threatening and sincere. Be non-threatening and sincere. If you're dealing with a retriever, the more threatening your tone or your body language or the way you talk to them, that's gonna close them up. And it's not a good way to communicate with them. So be non-threatening, and they will tell if you're being sincere or not. So again, you can't manipulate them. You've got to be sincere. Support their feelings. And again, especially if you're a lion, support how they feel, whether you feel it or not. That doesn't matter. This is how they feel. And you need to support that and be understanding of that. Let them know, okay, I understand you feel this way. You feel afraid to make a decision. You feel afraid to, whatever emotion they're feeling, support that, even though you're not saying it's okay. And then take time. Retrievers need time. They're not good at being pushed hard to make a decision right now. And show you are listening. With a retriever, if you don't look like you're listening, they're going to kind of shut out. They're going to shut off again. And you need to confirm agreement here. With a retriever, you need to confirm, okay, are you all right with this? Because they will tell you yes, yes, yes when it's no, no, no. And so you've got to really get them, nail it down and say, okay, are we in agreement with this? Is this okay with you? Are you ready to go forward on this? If you don't, later on, it's going to come back to haunt you. And so you want to make sure you confirm that agreement. And then the beaver. With beavers, you need to be accurate and precise. They want you to be very accurate. You have one wrong fact in there, you have wrong information, and they are going to take that and run with it. And so you've got to be very accurate, very precise. You've got to provide evidence and facts. They need evidence and facts. The otter doesn't need a lot of that. The retriever needs some of that, but the beaver needs a lot of evidence, a lot of facts. You've got to have done your homework. Otherwise, they're going to just reject you right away. Be thorough and well planned. You need to be very thorough in what you're going to discuss and well planned ahead of time. Be exact, organized, and prepared. So you see these words all kind of play together there. This is where the beaver's coming from. Now, you need to allow them time for decisions, but you've got to be decisive. Because with the beaver, because they're so detail-oriented, they'll keep coming up with new things. You'll think you've made a decision, and tomorrow they found out something new, and now we've got to go through this whole discussion all over again. And then the next day they found out something else. You got to go through the whole discussion. So you've got to kind of be decisive with them and say, okay, because you're never going to get all the facts. There's always going to be maybe something else later on, but we've got to make this decision. So you've got to allow time for the decision, but in the end, you've got to be decisive. So they may need time to. I want to do some more research on this. I want to do some more thinking on that, and that's fine. But when are we going to make this decision? And there's no change in it afterwards unless there's something obviously drastically different that we didn't know before. And so in doing that. Now the next thing, so that's a little bit. Now again, if you want more detail on how to communicate with the animals, that's what these books are for. I can't go through the whole book in this class. I'm trying to give you a condensed version of this. But you've got to learn how to talk to that animal and to communicate together. Now if you're two lions talking, that changes things again. A retriever talking to a lion, retriever, you've got to speak up. You've got to get a little bit louder. You've got to get a little bit more. If you're not barking loud, they're not going to listen to you. The lion's going to laugh at you, and so you've got to be willing to do that when you're talking to a lion. And if you're a lion talking to a retriever, you got to tone it down a lot. You've got to really back off a lot because you're going to put them in the corner with their tail between their legs, and they're not going to open up to you if you're coming on too strong with them. And so each personality's got to adjust to the other personality if they want to communicate with them, and it goes both ways in that as well. Now, the third thing is, how do we define our words? One of the problems in communication marriage is because we define our words differently, either because we're male and female, or because we're a different personality, or we define them differently because we were raised in different ways, and so the words mean different. Somebody once wrote something about a woman's dictionary, for example, and in a woman's dictionary, the word fine does not mean everything is fine. Okay, the word, when your wife says fine, it is not fine, and basically what it means is that you better just shut up and back off a little bit here because things are not fine right now. And when the wife's dictionary, she says, can we talk about something for just 5 minutes? 5 minutes in a wife's dictionary when she wants to talk about something is like the last 5 minutes of a basketball game. It is not 5 minutes. You tell your wife there's only 5 minutes left in the clock. She thinks that's going to be 5 minutes later. With all the timeouts and everything, that's like 30 minutes later. And when your wife says, I want you to talk to her for 5 minutes, plan on about 30 minutes. That's about how long it's going to take. And if your wife says nothing, if you say, well, what's wrong? And she says, nothing. Now, nothing is not nothing. Nothing is something. And nothing usually means you are in trouble. And usually when she says nothing, that means that you're going to have an argument that will last 5 minutes. And when it's all done, everything is not going to be fine anymore. And so, and you also have to watch not only the words she used, but the way she says it. For example, the words go ahead. Now, if your wife says to you, go ahead, and those eyebrows are raised up, that means do not go ahead, all right? That means at that point in time, this is not permission, and it's a dare is what it is. Yeah, go ahead. See what happens to you is what it means. Now, if she says go ahead and this is normal eyebrows, that is not permission either. It usually means I give up. Go ahead. It's just she's given up on you now. You're an idiot, and she can't talk you anything right, and so just go ahead and do it. And if you go ahead and do it, then nothing and fine and all the rest of it's going to come into play. Now, when your wife gives a loud sigh, just that is not a word, but it still means something. It's a verbal statement that means basically that she's wasting her time talking to you. Okay. Now, if she gives a soft sigh, that's good. Okay. That means okay, everything's probably okay right now. She's content, and just keep your mouth shut. Okay. And if she says, oh. Now the word "oh," that is a deep word, and it's it usually means something like this: "Oh, is that what you want? Oh, I see." When that usually followed by a little phrase after there, and that phrase is not going to be good. Okay, so just stop right there, and then she says, "Okay." Now this is one of the most dangerous statements that she can make to a man. Because when a wife says, okay, what she means is you better think long and hard before you decide, because she's got some penalties coming up with whatever you do next. Okay is not okay. And so we need to understand that. And so there's different terms that we use. And so one of the things that we need to understand is when you are talking to one another, you need to use a dictionary. You sometimes you've got to take a moment to define your words. Now, I am not suggesting when you're talking with your wife or your husband, you get a dictionary and say, okay, let me check that word out. I'm not suggesting that. But you do need to develop your own dictionary to define terms and understanding what your spouse means when they use that term. Okay, so make sure you define your words carefully both ways. That when I'm talking to my wife, I need to make sure that she understands what I mean by what I'm saying, how I define the word, and she needs to make sure she understands how to define that word. Make sure you both agree on the definition. For example, the word later. Now, my wife and I have never in 39 years agreed on the word later, what it means. To her, it means sometime in the next 24 hours and probably within the next 2 or 3 hours. To me, the word later means I don't really want to do this, and I'm hoping you will forget about it before I have to do it. That's what it means. And so we have to make sure we understand that. And she's learned finally that when I say later, she asks me, well, when later? That's again, that defining that term correctly and doing that. And so we need to ask that. And there's a lot of words and phrases we use that are interpreted differently. For example, a husband comes home and he says to his wife, what's for dinner? Now, in his mind, he's wondering, what is he going to eat a little bit later on? But his wife, a lot of times a wife will interpret that mean, you think I've been sitting around all day doing nothing and not preparing, not taking care of my family. She takes it as a challenge that you haven't been getting dinner ready when all he wants to know is we having hamburger or chili and rice or what are we having tonight? And we've defined those words differently. And so all of a sudden the wife is mad at her husband because he asked for dinner because she interpreted it as you're challenging that I don't have anything ready for you and I'm not a good housewife and I'm not taking care of, we define these differently. So it is very important that you develop a dictionary that both of you understand. And when you use these terms, sometimes you have to ask for clarification. What do you mean by that? And when is this going to happen? And so defining that, and this is where a lot of the problems come into play in that situation. And it can go both ways. It's like a husband might say to his wife, I want us to have some time together later in the day. And well, what does time together mean to the husband? What does time together mean to the wife? And what does later mean in that situation? And all these need to come into play in that. So we got to use a dictionary. But not only do we need to use a dictionary, but another book that is helpful to us is to use one of these. I can never say the word right, all right? And that is to come up with different words to use. Sometimes it's not, we both understand the definition of the term, but there's a better term to use than the one we're using. So what we need to do is try coming up with different, less inflammatory words in our discussions. A lot of times our arguments, they accelerate and they become worse because of the words we use are inflammatory. They just add fuel to the fire. It can be words like, you always. Now, that's not always true. In fact, very rarely is there something that somebody always does, or you never. See, a better way to say that might be, it feels like you always do this. That'd be a little bit better way to say it, or feel like you never do this. Or it'd be better to say, often this happens. We need to come up with a different word or words to use that are less inflammatory. It's like saying somebody is cheap. Now, that can be taken good or bad. I kind of take it as good. I like to think that I'm cheap, that I want to get by with spending the least amount of money. And I remember one time, we had a guy in the church. He was a Marine over at K-Bay, and he was just one of those goof-off kind of guys, Steve Fosnod. And one day, he had gone to San Diego for 2 weeks, came back, and he bought a suit at a Goodwill or something like that. And it was a brand new suit, looked like it had never been worn, and it was perfect fit for him. It looked like it had been tailored to him. And he bought it. I think he got it for like $5 or something like that, really cheap. And when he came to church, for a Marine to be dressed up looking nice outside of a Marine uniform is pretty good. And I complimented, I said, hey, man, Steve, you really look good for a Marine. And he said, yeah, and I got this for $5. And he told me the story of it. And I thought, man, that's really great. And so I got up in church, and he came up. He was the usher that came on the right side to pray. And so I said, Steve, come up here and pray for the offering. And when he got up there, I put my arm around and said, folks, doesn't this look good for a Marine right here? Doesn't he look really sharp? And he got this suit for $5. And after church, my wife says, you're in trouble because you just made it sound like Steve is cheap. Well, I think it's good to be cheap. I was praising him, but some people took it as I was putting him down in some way or another. And so the word cheap could be an inflammatory word. You say, you're cheap. So what's a better word? Well, I found a great word, parsimonious. Look it up in your dictionary sometime. Parsimonious means you're cheap, but it sounds better, doesn't it? You're parsimonious. It just sounds better. And if we could just, I really believe in most marriage relationships, if you could change about 20 or 30 words that you use and come up with a better, less inflammatory word, you would cut your arguments in half. You would bring the level of them down in half or more just by changing a few words that you tend to use over and over again that just inflame the situation and make it worse because the terms that you're using. And so we want to try to come up with better words and a better way to say it. Now, not only do you use the dictionary, whatever it's called, you also, letter C, can use an encyclopedia. Now, for those of you who don't know what an encyclopedia is, it's like Google on paper, okay? It's back before we had the Google. You'd buy these big encyclopedia sets, and it'd be like 20 or 30 volumes, and you put them on your shelf and look. People thought you were really smart, even though you never read them. And when you wanted more information than just a dictionary, you go to the encyclopedia. It gave you more detailed information. And what we have to learn to do is we have to learn to draw a word picture. To draw a word picture about how you feel or about what you want. To draw a word picture about how you feel or what you want. See, if we can take the emotion from one part of our life and carry it over to another part of that person's life, then they begin to see what you're feeling and they understand the emotion of it. And this is especially true for women, but it can be for both men and women. I read about one wife that she was trying to get across to her husband. There was something he was doing that kind of turned her off, and he was a big football fan. She talked about how she watched the football game. So you know how you feel when your team moves the ball all the way downfield, yard by yard, just working the ball all the way down there, and they get all the way down to the goal line, and then at the goal line they get stopped and they fumble the ball or something like that. You know how you feel right then? That's how I feel when you do this. It's like you've gone 90 yards, and that last 10 yards, you couldn't get it. And you blew it in the last 10 yards. You didn't make the touchdown. And that's what it feels like there. And she drew that. In the article, they just really drew it out. She had done it very, very well. And she got that. And he said that's when he understood what she was feeling. And by her drawing that word picture, he began to see how she felt by comparing to how he felt in a different situation. And so how can I draw a word picture for you to understand how I feel or what is the problem here that I'm struggling with or whatever else it might be to get them to understand that? So drawing a word picture about how you feel or what you want. And then letter C is you need to learn sign, and in the parentheses put the word body language. How many have ever learned sign language? Raise your hand. Okay, a few of you have. And, with sign language, you speak to the deaf using your hands. And I've noticed a lot of people that are very good with sign language. They not only use their hands, but they kind of use their whole body as well. And we need to learn that body language is very, very important. Go over to 1 Peter chapter 3. In verse number 1. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse number 1. It says, likewise, you wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of their wives. I love that word conversation. This is one of the reasons one of the other reasons why I love the King James Bible, because there's words in there that say so much more than if we try to modernize them. The word conversation here, it means not just what your voice says, but it's what your whole life says. You've probably heard the phrase, your walk talks more than your talk talks. And conversation is, what does your walk say? And it's saying basically, without you ever saying a word, your husband can see it in your life. And that's body language. And much of our communication is through body language, even more than our words. Go over to Psalms chapter 40 and look at verse number 3. Psalms chapter 40 and verse number 3. And he hath put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it and fear and shall trust in the Lord. It's a song in their mouth, but people see it. Now, when the choir sings this morning, I don't see musical notes coming out of their mouth. So what do we see? It's like Pastor Caleb stresses them all the time. It's not just you're singing on pitch and the perfect note, but you're singing from your heart, that people could see that worship and that praise in your face, in your whole body language and everything they see the worship of the Lord. And so we need to understand, when you're communicating with your spouse, it's not just the words that come out of your mouth, but it's the body language. 7% of communication is content, the actual words that you use. 7%, that's all. 7% of what people hear from you comes, first of all, from the words that you use. 38% of communication is in tone of voice. Don't use that tone with me. The tone of voice. You all know what it's talking about. That you can say the same word with a different tone of voice and change the meaning of that word. I can say the word I love you. I can say, yeah, I love you. Or I can say, I love you. You ever said this to your wife? I told you I love you. Even though you're mad at them and you got a scowl on your face. You know, it's not just the words that we use, but it's the tone of voice that we use. And then a full 50% of communication is nonverbal. The body language, the face, the way we stand, the way we look, the way we hold our hands, all of that comes to play with it. Now, this is not my study. This is, you can go on. There's going to be different numbers in there, but they've done this over and over again, proven this in study after study after study. So yes, you do need to choose the right words, and you need to choose better words, and you need to draw word pictures, but you also need to watch the way you say it. Man, I'm so guilty of that so often. And that's what often causes our arguments. When you walk in and say, what's for dinner? How you say it is going to change everything. And so work on that communication through the body language. When you get into a discussion, you get into an argument, whatever you want to call it, watch your body language. Work on dealing with that. And then, and these are things you need to talk about with each other too. Some of the things you need to share is what are the words that hurt me? You know, when you use these words, that hurts, or I take it this way. Talk about how you define your words. Talk about maybe better words that you could use, and describe how you feel with that. Talk about how intimidating. If you're a retriever, it's probably, if you're married to a lion, they can intimidate you. And you got to talk about, you intimidate me with this. You raise your voice. Now, in different households, that changes. My wife is from a house that she had 4 brothers. It was not a quiet house by any means, but she was the only girl, and she was very well behaved, and so she very rarely had to be yelled at by her father. You know, if he just rattled the newspaper, she'd break out in tears. So she didn't have to be yelled at. And boy, sitting at the table, everybody sat down together, and they passed the food around the table, and there was not a lot of discussion going on at the table, everything like that. Now, when I grew up, we also had 5 children and my mom, and at our table, if you weren't loud, you weren't heard. You know, and our table, it was a free-for-all. So we would pray for our food. Now, my wife's home, they'd pray for the food, and then they'd pass the food around the table. In my house, you pray for the food, and amen also meant go. It was like the race is on. And if you're not fast enough to grab what you want, you're not getting it. And so when we said amen, it was like you reach across the table and grab this, and you reach across and grab that. And we were loud because that's the way we were communicating. And I remember my brother and I, we used to just love to argue. It's just part of being brothers, you know. And I like debating and stuff. And I remember many times I'd have a chicken leg in my hand. I'd be saying, and another thing, and I'd be really loud with him going on like that. When we first got married, we sat down to eat. And I can remember one of those times we were having fried chicken and some other things there. We sat down together to eat, and my wife prepared this great meal, and we prayed and amen. And right after we said amen, I reached across her plate and grabbed the chicken plate, pulled it over to me, and I reached over, got the mashed potatoes, put it on my table. I was just filling my plate up and everything like that. Wasn't waiting for her to pass it to me. I wasn't really passing it over to her. I just kind of put it back. I figured she knew where it was, and it's only two of us. What do we got to pass it around, left, right, or whatever? And then I remember I had a chicken leg in my hand, and I was going, and another thing. And then about that time, I realized she had nothing on her plate. And she was sitting there with these big round eyes looking at me. And I think in her mind at that point, she was thinking, what did I marry? But see, that was my way of communicating at the table versus her way of communicating at the table. Now, what we learned since there is we've learned to kind of come to the middle ground. I've learned to wait until the food is passed. She's learned you better pass it quick. I've learned to tone the voice down a little bit, and she's learned to speak up a little bit. And so we've got to learn that. And you've got to discuss this in your non-bad times. And you got to find also the place and way you can discuss it. Some people do better taking a walk and talking. Some people do better going to a restaurant, because at a restaurant you don't raise your voice because you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of everybody. So it keeps you a little calmer. And that's a good place to have your discussions, at Starbucks or a restaurant or McDonald's or something like that. And you got to find the way to communicate. Then number 2, stop long enough to hear. Look beneath the surface, pardon the pun, listen to and with the heart. Stop long enough to hear, look beneath the surface, and listen to and with the heart. Go over to James chapter 1. James chapter 1, verses 19 through 21. James 1 verse 19 says, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Wherefore lay apart all filthiness and superfluity of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word which is able to save your souls." Okay, so let every man be swift to hear. So we got to be faster at listening than we are at talking. Too many of us put our mouth in gear before our minds ever started working. And we've got to take the time to slow down and listen to the other person, to pay attention to what they have to say. And there's a lot of, I'm sure you've heard a lot of tools that you can use to do that. Like one of the things is when your spouse is finished saying what they've got to say, before you can rebut their argument, you've got to repeat back to them in your own words what you think they just said. And you cannot rebut their argument. You can't answer them back until they agree, okay, you understand what I said. And there's other tools that we can use in that same way, but it's important. We got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So let's listen twice as much as we talk. And again, different personalities are going to deal with that differently. But we need to learn to listen. And some of you are not good at that. And that's where the problem is. You need to stop long enough to hear, look beneath the surface. Look at what's going on inside. What are the frustrations? What are the problems? What are the things that I need to understand here? Maybe it's something that happened at work and they're taking it out on you. Maybe it's they're sick. You know, when I'm sick, I'm not the best person to communicate with. Maybe it is their personality or whatever else it is. Look a little deeper here beyond the words that are being said. And then listen to and with the heart. Don't just listen with the ears and the mind, but listen with your heart and try and understand what they have to say. So swift to hear, slow to speak. Take time to think through your answers. Now, here's the problem. If my wife and I are sitting across from each other talking about something, silence is not always golden, especially for certain personalities. And so we're having a discussion back and forth, and I say something, and she stops and, okay, if I say what I think, first of all, usually what you first think is not the good thing to say, right? And if I react to him, see, what we don't want to do is when you react, that's going to get you in trouble. You got to act. But if I say something and then she doesn't immediately answer me, my tendency is, yeah, see, you have no answer, don't you? Now, I might not say that out loud, but my body language says that. But if we're doing something together, like taking a walk or going for a drive or even washing dishes together, one of the best places to have an argument is when you're washing dishes. Because, number one, your spouse, your wife is automatically be happy with you because you're helping her with one of the home chores. That automatically puts you in better standing in that situation. And number two, you're just doing something together. And in that case, if you want to take a minute to think through what you're going to respond with, you can concentrate. I can wash this spot off the dish, so give me a minute here. And you can concentrate. Or if you go walk together, you say, oh, look at that dog over there. And you can kind of give yourself time to think about it when you're doing something together rather than when you're sitting down facing each other. Sometimes those create more conflict because we're right there, and silence is not golden. Sometimes silence is the best answer you can get for a moment. Now, not completely, but give yourself time to think through what you're going to say. So, swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Don't let that wrath build up. Don't let you get upset. And I find that's one of the things that I tend to do as well. That otter personality in me and the male in me, I let my temper build up, or I let my emotions build up inside of me. And then I react emotionally rather than act logically. And if, as a man, if I get in the emotions category, then I've lost my logic as well. And so I want to be careful about doing that and getting that emotional response in there, and to be careful of that as well. So we want to be slow to wrath, slow to that anger, slow to reacting to the other person. Act, don't react. So act upon that. And then in order to do this, what we need to do is we need to ought your thoughts. You need to ought your thoughts. Now, what do we mean by that? Go over to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, verse 23. Matthew 5:23 says, therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there remembers that thy brother hath aught against thee. So your brother is mad at you, not just your physical brother, but your spiritual brother. Then go over to Mark chapter 11. Mark chapter 11, verses 25 and 26. When you stand praying, forgive. If you have aught against any, that your Father also which is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father which is in heaven forgive your trespasses. So Matthew 5, it says, if your brother have aught against you. In Mark chapter 11, it says, if you have aught against any. Well, if my wife has a problem with me, she can come tell me. No, that's not biblical. Whether she's mad at me or I'm mad at her, we need to ought our thoughts. I find that most of our arguments are based upon one or both of us has not openly said, this is what I'm feeling or thinking. And we expect the other person to be a mind reader, which they're not. First of all, she's female, I'm male, we don't think alike. Secondly, she's a beaver retriever, I'm an otter lion, we don't think alike. And thirdly, we have a totally different background, we don't think alike. And yet I assume what happens is she does something, and I assume she does it because obviously she, and I put these assumptions on her, and instead of saying to her, this is what I want, and we're not clear about that. And we hint at it, and we beat around the bush on it, but we just don't come out and say, this is what I want, or this is what I'm feeling, or this is, we need to ought our thoughts. And most of the time, I'm amazed in my counseling how often couples will come in and we'll start digging into the problems, and it comes out, something comes out, and it's like, I didn't know that. Well, why didn't you know that? Well, he never said, or she never said, or I never asked, and we did not ought our thoughts. And so if you got something against your wife's got something against you, if there's something come up, you need to bring it up and say, here's where the problem is, and talk about it openly and honestly, because you can't deal with it. And do not expect your spouse to be a mind reader. So we need the right words at the right time. The right words at the right time. Proverbs chapter 25, and verse number 11. Proverbs 25 and verse number 11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pitchers of silver. It's a beautiful thing. The right words at the right time. Proverbs chapter 15 and verse number 23. Proverbs 15 and verse 23. A man hath joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is. So spoken in good season. So I want to choose the right words at the right time. And this all, it comes into timing. For example, how many have ever heard the radio commentary Paul Harvey? Anybody remember him? A few of you do. He was a conservative commentator. He had a couple different programs. He had the 15-minute kind of little news bits and stuff. And then he had another one called The Rest of the Story, where he give you background information about things that we all knew about, but didn't know the underlying story of it. And really, I loved listening to him. And what I would hate is when my wife would try to talk to me when Paul Harvey was talking. Wait a minute. And now I'm in a dilemma. Do I listen to my wife or listen to Paul Harvey? And that was back when, if you didn't hear it when it was on the radio, you couldn't listen to it on a podcast later on. It's either you paid attention now or you didn't get to hear the story. And we'd be halfway through the rest of the story. And my wife would say, well, wait a minute. Don't do that. There's right timing. There's also right timing in bringing up a problem. There's right timing to even deal with a problem. Maybe this is not the best time when you first get home from work. We got to give each other some time to adjust and to prepare for dealing with those problems. We've got to learn our timing. And a lot of your problems, a lot of your conflict comes from terrible timing, bad timing. Or it comes from not choosing the right words, the right way to approach it. And so the right words at the right time are very, very important. So think through what you're going to say and think through when you're going to say it as well as how you're going to say it. And then number 2, and we'll stop with this one, looking for a few good words. Proverbs 15 and verse number 2. The tongue of the wise uses knowledge aright, but the mouth of fools poureth out foolishness. Proverbs 15 and verse number 28. The heart of the righteous studieth to answer, but the mouth of the wicked poureth out evil things. In other words, I start thinking before I start talking. Wow. If we could just learn that. That's where I get most of my phone calls late at night. Because he said something stupid, and then she said something stupid, and it just went back and forth like that. They started reacting instead of acting, and they weren't stopping and thinking about what they're going to say. And so we need to use a few good words. Again, listen twice as much as you talk, and you will gain a much better relationship, much better communication as well.